You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing. She had her finger an inch from his face. The whole cabin had gone quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the air system breathing through the vents. He just sat there, didn't blink, didn't raise his voice. And maybe that's what I set her all. Because the next thing anybody heard was the flat crack of her open hand landing across his cheek. It echoed, off the leather, off the polished wood. A junior attendant in the galley dropped a tray, and the sound of breaking glass barely registered. He turned his head back slow. There was a red mark already blooming on his jaw. He touched it once with 2 fingers, almost curious, like he was checking it was real. Then he looked up at her and said 6 words, so soft she had to lean in to catch them. "You should not have done that." She laughed in his face. She actually laughed. She thought she'd won. 10 minutes from now, she'd be standing alone on a freezing tarmac, watching the most expensive aircraft she would ever set foot on taxi away without her. 90 days from now, she'd be reading her own name in a courtroom. And she had no idea, none, that the man she just slapped owned the jet she was standing on. Let me back this up. Let me show you exactly how a woman talks herself out of a 9-year career in the span of a single morning. Stay with me on this one, because the turn it takes about halfway through is something else. It was a little after 6 in the morning at Centennial Airport, just south of Denver, and the cold had teeth. The mountains out west were still just an outline, a darker shade against a sky that hadn't decided what color it wanted to be yet. Out on the apron, the ground crews moved in their orange vests, breath-fogging, boots crunching the frost on the concrete. You could smell the jet fuel before you saw a single plane. That sharp, oily, almost sweet smell that hangs over every private field at dawn. A dark gray pickup pulled up to the curb outside the executive terminal. Not a town car. Not a chauffeured SUV with tinted glass. A pickup, a few years old, a little mud on the wheel wells. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out into the cold. No assistant, no bodyguard, nobody holding a sign with his name spelled out in the block letters. Just him, a canvas duffel slung over one shoulder and a thin laptop bag in his other hand. He shut the door, gave the truck a pat on the roof like you'd pat a horse, and walked toward the terminal doors alone. His name was Marcus Bishop, 48 years old, and if you'd typed his name into a search bar that morning, you'd have come up with almost nothing. No magazine covers. No flashy interviews, a few grainy photos from an industry conference where he was clearly trying to stand near the back. That was the whole idea. Marcus grew up in Gary, Indiana, in a part of town the city had mostly given up on. His mother worked nights at a packing plant until her back gave out. After that, it was just him and his grandmother, Cora, in a narrow house with a furnace that wheezed all winter. Cora cleaned offices downtown. She'd come home at midnight smelling like industrial soap and still find the energy to check his math homework at the kitchen table. She used to tell him one thing over and over, the same line, like she was hammering a nail in slow. People will show you who they are when they think you can't do a thing about it. Pay attention when they do. He paid attention. He scraped through community college on grants and a job stocking shelves overnight. Transferred to Georgia Tech on a scholarship he applied for 4 times before they finally said yes. And over the next 20-odd years, he built a company out of an idea most people thought was boring. Storing electricity, big industrial batteries, grid systems, the unglamorous backbone that keeps the lights on when the wind stops and the sun goes down. He called it Lumen Grid Holdings. By that cold morning in Denver, it was worth a hair under $6 billion, with contracts in 19 states and a waiting list of utilities that wanted in. But here's the thing about Marcus. You'd never know any of that to look at him. No watch worth more than a car. No tailored anything. That morning, he had on a faded denim jacket over a plain gray shirt jeans gone soft at the knees, and a pair of brown work boots that had clearly walked a few job sites. A worn baseball cap. That was it. He dressed that way on purpose, always had, because somewhere along the line he'd turned his grandmother's advice into a kind of quiet test. The way a stranger treats you when they've decided you're nobody, that's the truest thing they'll ever tell you about themselves. And Marcus collected those truths the way other men collect watches. He walked into the terminal, nodded at the woman behind the front desk. She lit up. "Morning, Mr. Bishop. They've got you fueled and ready. Coffee's on board." "Thanks, Janelle. Tell your kid good luck at state." She beamed. She'd checked him in maybe 30 times. She knew exactly who he was, and she knew the suit didn't make the man. Out on the ramp, his aircraft was waiting. A Bombardier Global 7500. Tail number November 88 Lima Golf. $73 million of engineering, registered to Lumen Grid Holdings with Marcus Bishop as sole owner. He didn't keep a flight department in-house. He leased the management of the jet, crew, scheduling, maintenance, the whole operation, to a charter company out of Dallas called Crestmont Aviation Group. Remember that name? Crestmont. It matters later. He climbed the air stairs, and the cabin door swung open, and that smell rolled out to meet him. Warm leather, a little polish, a thread of cedar from the diffuser by the galley. Cream seats, dark walnut trim. 4 big chairs up front. A long conference table with screens built into the wood. A closed-off bedroom suite in the back behind a frosted glass door. Marcus dropped into his usual spot, second row, left side, by the window. He set the duffel on the seat beside him, pulled out his laptop, and started going over the documents he'd be signing that afternoon. He was flying to Charlotte to close a $420 million partnership with a Carolina utility, grid storage for half the state, the kind of deal that doesn't make the news but quietly changes a few 100,000 lives. Just another Tuesday for a man who'd learned a long time ago to move through the world without making noise. Now, let me introduce you to the other person in this story, because she's about to walk on that plane. Her name was Brooke Sterling. 43 years old, lead cabin attendant with Crestmont Aviation, 9 years on the line. Blonde hair scraped back into a bun so tight it looked like it hurt. Pressed uniform, not a thread out of place, and a smile she could turn on and off like a faucet, that never once reached her eyes. Among the crews who'd flown with her, Brooke had a reputation. The version they said to her face was that she ran a tight cabin. The version they said in the crew van, after she'd gone, was uglier than that. People had noticed a pattern. Brooke was warm to some passengers and iced to others, and you didn't have to look hard to figure out where the line fell. Older white men got the full performance. The champagne, the laugh, the "of course, sir," right away. Anybody who didn't fit the picture she carried around, in her head, of what a private jet passenger should look like, got something colder. Shorter answers, longer stares, a way of making you feel like you'd snuck in. 2 formal complaints had been filed against her over the years, both from passengers of color. Both had landed on the desk of the same complaint supervisor, a man named Roy Tillman, and both had been closed with the same 3-word note at the bottom: no action warranted. Now here's the part that's almost funny, if it weren't so ugly. Brooke wasn't even supposed to be on this flight. Her scheduled trip had canceled the night before, a maintenance hold on a different aircraft, and Crestmont's scheduler had plugged her into the Denver charter at the last minute, calling her at 4 in the morning to do it. She showed up rushed and irritated, running on bad sleep and a gas station coffee, and because she was rushed, she skipped a step. She didn't read the flight manifest, didn't check who the principal client was, didn't glance at the owner profile that would have told her, in plain text, exactly whose plane she was standing on. She just dropped her bag in the galley, smoothed her uniform, and walked up into the main cabin to take a look at her passenger for the day. and what she saw was a black man in a denim jacket and a ball cap sitting in the owner's seat of a $73 million aircraft with his boots up and a duffel bag on the leather beside him. Her smile didn't even get the chance to switch on. It just never appeared. Her chin came up. Her eyes went narrow. And in about a second and a half, standing in that aisle, Brooke Sterling decided the whole story of her day. She didn't ask the front desk. She didn't open the manifest she'd skipped. She didn't radio anybody. She looked at a man and she assumed. And that assumption was going to cost her everything she had. Brooke didn't walk over to him. She came at him, heels clicking hard on the cabin floor, fast, like a clock running down. She stopped right at his row and stood over him with her arms folded, looking down the way you'd look at a stain somebody had tracked in on a nice carpet. "I'm going to need to see your booking." No good morning, no welcome aboard. Just that, flat and sharp, the voice of somebody who'd already made up her mind about how this went. Marcus looked up from his laptop. He took her in for a second, the folded arms, the set jaw, and something behind his eyes went quiet and attentive. Like a man who'd seen this exact movie before and already knew the ending. He didn't argue. He picked up his phone, opened the Crestmont app, and turned the screen toward her. The charter confirmation sat right there. His name, the flight number, the tail number, today's date, all of it. Brooke barely glanced at it. She made a small sound through her nose, almost a laugh. "That just shows a reservation. It doesn't tell me you're cleared and to sit here." She put a little weight on the word, like the seat was made of something he couldn't afford to touch. "This is the owner's cabin. Maybe there was a mix-up at the desk. It happens more than you'd think." Marcus set the phone down on his knee. When he spoke, his voice was level and unbothered, the voice of a man who has been underestimated so many times it stopped being interesting. "There's no mix-up. I'm right where I'm supposed to be." That was the wrong answer for Brooke. She wanted him flustered. She wanted him to gather his things and apologize for the misunderstanding and shuffle to the back. Calm wasn't in her plan. She put her hands on her hips. "Look, I don't know how you got back here, but the owner of this aircraft could be boarding any minute, and I'm not about to have him walk on and find someone in his seat. There are perfectly nice seats further back. Let's get you settled before this gets awkward." Marcus said nothing for a moment. He just held her eyes, steady, until she was the one who wanted to look away. Then he picked his phone back up, slid his earbuds in, and went back to his documents. He ignored her, and that, being ignored, being dismissed by someone she'd already filed away as beneath her, did something to Brooke Sterling. You could watch it move across her face, the color rising up her neck, her jaw working, her hands curling at her sides. She stepped past him, reached over and grabbed the duffel bag off the seat with both hands. "I'll help you move. You'll be more comfortable in the back." She didn't ask. She just took his bag and started down the aisle with it, like she had every right in the world. Marcus stood up, and when he did, the cabin seemed to get smaller. He was tall, 6'1", maybe 2, broad across the shoulders, and even in a denim jacket he had a way of filling a space without trying. He didn't shout. He didn't reach for her. He just spoke, clear and low, the kind of voice that doesn't need volume because it's never had to fight to be heard. "Put my bag down. I'm not moving." Brooke froze with her back to him, 3 feet up the aisle. She turned around slow, still gripping the strap, and for half a second something flickered across her face. Not quite fear, the first small crack of doubt, but her pride swallowed it whole before it could grow. She let the bag drop. Not gently. She let it hit the floor with a thud that bounced off the walls. Then she lowered her voice and leaned in just enough to make it a threat. "You really don't want to make a problem out of this. Trust me." And, as she turned away, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear, she muttered, "This is what happens when they let just anybody back here." In the galley doorway, a young woman stood frozen with a stack of glasses in her hands. Her name was Maya Calderon, 23 years old, 4 months into the job, the most junior person on the whole roster. She'd heard the stories about Brooke. Everybody had. She'd watched her be short and cold before, watched her sigh at passengers and roll her eyes the second their backs were turned. But this was different. This had a temperature to it Maya didn't have a name for yet. And it scared her. Her mouth opened. She wanted to say something. The words wouldn't come. Because Maya knew how this place worked. Brooke had seniority. Brooke had friends in scheduling. And everybody on the line knew what had happened last year to a junior attendant named Priya, who'd disagreed with Brooke once, politely, during a briefing, and who'd found herself reassigned to a turboprop route out of a regional field 2 weeks later, no explanation given. Nobody could prove Brooke did it. Nobody had to. So Maya stood there, holding her glasses, holding her breath, and she did the thing she'd hate herself for later. She stayed quiet. Back in the cabin, Marcus sat down, put his earbuds back in, picked his laptop up off the seat and went back to work. His face gave away nothing. That kind of stillness that could mean a man is at peace, or could mean there's a storm building behind a wall and the wall's holding for now. Brooke wasn't finished. She came back. Her face was flushed red now, blotchy at the cheeks, and her voice came louder than it needed to be in a cabin that quiet. "I'm only going to say this one more time." She planted herself in the aisle, right at his row. "Either you show me a government ID that proves you belong in this cabin, or I'm calling ground security to come remove you from this aircraft. Those are your options." Marcus took the earbuds out. Slow. He folded them and set them on the armrest. Then he looked up at her, and his voice was almost gentle. "I'd like to speak to your captain." Brooke's eyes went wide, theatrical, like he'd said something insane. "You don't get to make demands on my plane. You're a passenger. I'm the crew. I decide who sits where, and I am telling you that you do not belong in this seat." She pointed a stiff arm toward the back of the cabin. "Now, move, or I make the call." He looked at her for a long moment. Really looked. His breathing was slow and even. And when he answered, his voice had dropped so low she had to lean down to catch it. "I'm not going anywhere. Do whatever you feel like you need to do." Something snapped in her. Maybe it was how calm he was. Maybe it was that he wouldn't bend, wouldn't flinch, wouldn't give her the satisfaction of the apology she felt entitled to. Or maybe it was the plain, unbearable fact of it, that a man she'd decided was a nobody was sitting in the best seat on the plane and refusing to do what she said. She reached down and snatched his phone off the armrest, fast, like she was confiscating something from a kid. Marcus moved on instinct. He reached to take it back. His hand came up, brushed the side of her wrist, barely a touch, the kind of contact that happens when somebody grabs your stuff and you reach for it without thinking. Brooke recoiled like she'd been burned. She stumbled back a full step, her mouth dropping open in a wide performed shock. And then she swung. Open hand, full arm, the whole weight of 9 years of getting away with it, right across the side of his face. The sound was enormous in that small space. A flat, ugly crack that ricocheted off the walls and hung in the recycled air like smoke. In the galley, Maya's stack of glasses slipped. One hit the floor and shattered. Her hand flew to her mouth. Marcus's head turned with the blow. A red welt rose on his cheek almost immediately. He sat completely still for what felt like a long time, but was maybe 4 seconds. Brooke was breathing hard now, her chest going, her hand still half raised. And then she did the thing that turned this from an ugly moment into the end of her life as she knew it. She pointed at him and started to lie. "Don't you ever put your hands on me." Her voice shook, and she made sure it shook. Everyone here saw that. He grabbed me. He grabbed me, and I had every right to protect myself." She straightened her jacket, smoothed the hair that had come loose, and her whole face changed, flipping from rage to something rehearsed, something almost serene. "I'm calling security. You assaulted a member of this crew, and you are getting off this plane." Marcus didn't speak. Not yet. He raised his hand, not toward her, toward the inside pocket of his denim jacket. Two fingers, moving slow and deliberate, slow enough that Brooke took a step back without meaning to. He pulled out a second phone. The screen was already on. The recording app was open. A red timer was counting up in the corner. It read 11 minutes and 40 seconds. He'd hit record the moment she first started up the aisle toward him. He set the phone face up on the armrest, the little microphone icon pulsing soft on the screen, and he looked at her, and when he spoke, his voice barely cleared the hum of the engines. "Everything you've said, everything you just did, the bag, the slap, the lie you're about to tell security." He tapped the screen once. "It's all right here. Picture and sound." Brooke stared at the phone. Most people, the second they realize they're being recorded, snap out of it. They backtrack. They lower their voice. They suddenly remember how to behave like a person. The recording acts like cold water. Brooke Sterling was not most people. She looked at that red timer counting up 11:51, 52, 53, and then she did something that told you everything you'd ever need to know about who she actually was. She smiled, not a nervous smile, not an embarrassed one, a cold, flat, confident smile. The smile of a woman who had been in tight spots before and had always come out clean. "Record whatever you want," she said. "When security gets up here, we'll find out real quick who they believe. A 9-year lead attendant or some man in a ball cap who forced his way into the owner's seat." She let the word man sit there with a little curl on it, like he was barely that. Then she turned her back on him, walked to the intercom panel by the galley, and pressed the button for ground operations. And her voice transformed. It went soft, high, shaky around the edges. A frightened woman calling for help. It was a performance so clean it should have won something. "Ground Ops, this is Lead Attendant Sterling on November 88 Lima Golf. I need security at the aircraft right away. We have a passenger in the owner's cabin who won't comply with crew instructions, and he's become physical." A small pause, like she was steadying herself. He grabbed my arm. "I don't feel safe. Please send someone now." She let go of the button, took a breath, and when she turned back to face the cabin, her whole face had reset. Calm, professional, the wronged party. It was honestly a master class in lying with your whole body. In the galley, Maya watched all of it. She'd seen every second. She'd seen Brooke walk up without checking a thing. She'd seen her take the bag. She'd seen her grab the phone. She'd seen Marcus's hand come up to take it back, that little nothing of a brush, and she'd seen Brooke recoil from contact that barely happened. And she'd seen the slap. There was no grab. There was no assault. The only person who put a hand on anybody in that cabin was Brooke Sterling. Maya knew it in her bones. She also knew what happened to people who crossed Brooke. She thought about Priya, reassigned to a turboprop in the middle of nowhere over a polite disagreement. She thought about her own rent, her own student loans, the 4 months of seniority she'd built that felt like everything and was actually nothing. So she stood there with a dustpan full of broken glass, her conscience screaming at her to speak, and her fear screaming louder to keep her mouth shut. 2 minutes later, boots on the air stairs. 2 ground security officers came up into the cabin. One older, gray, coming in at the temples, the kind of calm that comes from 20 years of seeing people at their worst and learning not to jump. The other younger, wound tight, hand resting near his radio. Brooke met them at the cabin door before they'd taken 3 steps. And she was on. The trembling voice, the hand pressed to her chest, the whole fragile thing she'd manufactured. Thank you for coming so fast. The man in row 2, he forced his way into the owner's cabin. I asked him to move more than once, very politely. He refused, and then he grabbed my arm hard, and she let her voice catch. I had to defend myself. He's been hostile this whole time. I want him off this aircraft. The older officer, his nameplate read Delgado, nodded slow. He didn't rush. He walked down the aisle toward Marcus, who was still seated, still calm, laptop on his knees, phone still recording on the armrest. "Sir, I'm Officer Delgado, Airport Ground Security. Mind if I see some identification?" Marcus reached into his back pocket. No sudden moves. He pulled out his wallet, slid out his driver's license, and handed it over. Delgado looked at the photo, looked at the man, looked at the name printed across the front. Marcus Bishop. His expression didn't change, not in any way you could point to. But something behind his eyes shifted, and he held that license maybe a half-second longer than he needed to. Then he handed it back, stepped a few feet up the aisle, turned his back to the cabin, and keyed his radio low. "Ground Ops, Delgado. I need a client verification on tail November 88 Lima Golf. Confirm the registered owner and the principal on today's charter." Silence. 10 seconds. 15. 20. Then the radio crackled. "Delgado, Ground Ops, tail 88. Lima Golf is registered to Lumen Grid Holdings. Today's principal client is the registered owner himself, flying solo. Name on file is Marcus Bishop. He owns the aircraft." Delgado lowered the radio. He stood very still for a second. Then he turned around, and he didn't turn toward Marcus. He turned toward Brooke, and the look on his face was somewhere between disbelief and a slow, banked anger. He walked back to Marcus's row, and this time when he spoke, his tone had changed completely. Quieter, almost careful. "Mr. Bishop, I'm sorry for the disruption, sir. Is there anything you need from us right now?" Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he said 3 words, soft as a whisper, and heavy as a dropped engine. "Get her off." The younger officer was already staring at Brooke, his mouth slightly open, the hand that had been near his radio now hanging at his side. And Brooke. Brooke was standing by the galley with her arms frozen, the color draining out of her face so fast she looked like wax. Her lips moved before any sound came. Then it came out cracked and small. "Wait. No. That can't be right. He can't be the, look at him. There's no way he—" She didn't finish it. She didn't have to. Every single person in that cabin heard the rest of the sentence she swallowed. The word she choked on was louder than anything she'd screamed all morning. "There's no way he owns this." And underneath that, the thing she'd assumed the moment she laid eyes on him, finally out in the open for everyone to see. Let that sit for a second. She slapped the man who owns the plane. She's standing on his property, in a uniform his charter contract pays for, and she hit him across the face and made up a story about it on the record. I want you to understand how completely she has just ended herself, because it's about to get so much worse. The cabin was dead quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight to it, that presses on your chest. And then Maya Calderon stepped forward. She came out of the galley slow, and her hands were shaking, and her voice when it started was barely a whisper. But it got stronger with every word. "Officers, I need to tell you what actually happened." Brooke's head snapped around, eyes blazing. "Maya, don't." Maya didn't stop. She looked straight at Delgado. "I saw the whole thing from the galley. Mr. Bishop was sitting down when Ms. Sterling came up to him. He showed her his booking on his phone. She told him it didn't count. She took his bag without asking and tried to carry it to the back. When he stood up and told her to put it down, she dropped it on the floor on purpose." Her voice was shaking, but she kept going. "Then she came back a 3rd time and told him to leave. He asked to talk to the captain. She grabbed his phone out of his hand. He reached to take it back. He barely touched her, and she slapped him. Full force. And then she said she was going to report him for assault." The cabin was so still you could hear the air cycling through the ducts. Brooke took a step toward her, and her voice came out as a hiss, low and venomous. "You ungrateful little. You've been here 4 months. You don't know how any of this works. When I'm done, you will never work another—" "That's enough." Delgado's voice cut across the cabin like a door slamming. "Miss Sterling, stop talking, right now." And at that exact moment, the cockpit door opened. The captain stepped out. His name was Ray Mercer, 22 years flying, headset still around his neck. He'd been listening to the security channel for the last 2 minutes, and his face was tight. He looked at Delgado, then at Brooke, then at Marcus, and the red welt on his cheek. It took him about 30 seconds to get the full picture. And in those 30 seconds, his expression went from professional blankness to something cold and final. He turned to Brooke. His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a man who has commanded a cockpit through emergencies. "Ms. Sterling, you're relieved of duty for this flight, effective now. Get your things. You have 60 seconds to deplane." Her mouth opened. "Captain, if you'd just let me explain." "That wasn't a request. 60 seconds. Starting now." She stood there for maybe 5 of them. Her eyes jumped around the cabin, to Delgado, to the young officer, to Maya, and finally to Marcus. Marcus didn't look at her. He was already back on his laptop. He'd already moved past her, the way you step over something on the sidewalk. Brooke grabbed her bag from the galley. Her movements were jerky now, frantic, all that polished composure gone. She walked toward the cabin door, and her heels that had clicked so confidently up the aisle an hour ago landed uneven now. A retreat instead of a march. At the top of the air stairs she turned back, mouth open, maybe to shout, maybe to beg. But the cabin door was already swinging shut. The last thing she saw was the back of Marcus Bishop's head, perfectly still, already gone from her. The stairs retracted, the door sealed. And Brooke Sterling stood alone on the frozen tarmac in the dark Denver morning, watching the most expensive aircraft she would ever board taxi away without her, the engine spooling up to a whine she could feel in her teeth. The jet lifted off at 7:18. Smooth, quiet, the city lights dropping away below as the Global climbed into the gray and broke through into clean morning sky over the Rockies. Inside, everything was still. Maya brought Marcus a cup of coffee. Her hands were still trembling, the cup rattling faintly in the saucer. Her voice came out small. "Mr. Bishop, I'm so sorry. About all of it." Marcus looked up, and for the first time that morning, something in his face eased. He took the coffee. "Thank you, Maya. What you did back there, standing up when you had every reason not to, that took more than you know." Her eyes went bright. She nodded fast, set the saucer down, and got back to the galley before the tears came. Marcus set the coffee on the table. Then he picked up his personal phone and tapped one name. Vincent Aldridge, his attorney of 16 years. Vince picked up on the second ring, voice gravelly with early morning. "Marcus, it's barely 7 your time. What's wrong?" "I need you working on something. Now." He told him everything. The bag, the phone, the slap, the fake distress call, the recording. His voice never lifted. No heat in it. Just cold, careful detail, like a man reading off the items on a list he intends to work through one by one. When he finished, Vince was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Marcus, in 16 years I have watched you walk away from this kind of thing more times than I can count. The hotel in Atlanta, the bank manager in Chicago. You always let it go." "I know. Don't let this one go." "I wasn't planning to. Now I want to be straight with you about something, because the easy version of this story is that he was just angry and wanted revenge, and that's not it. That night, after he'd landed and signed his $420 million deal and shaken every hand in that Charlotte boardroom while a red mark was still faintly visible on his jaw, Marcus called his wife. Her name is Ada, a pediatric surgeon. The kind of person who can hold a room together with 2 sentences and a look. He told her the whole thing, plain, the way he tells her everything. The line went quiet for a while. Then she said, "How's your face?" "It's fine." Marcus, how many times has somebody done a version of that to a person who didn't have a recording, didn't own the plane, didn't have a Vince Aldridge on speed dial? You know how many. You see them. You've been telling me about them for 20 years. He didn't answer. "You always keep your head down because it's worked for you," she said. "It made you rich. But quiet doesn't fix the thing. Quiet is exactly what let her get away with it the last 2 times. Use what you have. For once, make some noise." He closed his eyes, thought about his grandmother Cora coming home at midnight smelling like industrial soap. People will show you who they are when they think you can't do a thing about it. Well, he could do something about it. "Okay," he said. Vince moved fast. By the next morning he had a plan, and it had teeth. First, a formal battery complaint filed with the airport police, the full recording attached as evidence. Second, a demand letter to Crestmont Aviation's legal department with the video attached and a 48-hour clock on a written response. Third, a demand for an internal review of Brooke Sterling's entire employment history. Every prior complaint, every disciplinary note, every pattern somebody had quietly buried. And fourth, the one that made the difference, a formal notice that Lumen Grid Holdings was reviewing its fleet management contract with Crestmont. $11 million a year. Crestmont's single, biggest client. Marcus approved every word. And he added one thing of his own, a name. Camille Ortiz, an investigative reporter who'd spent a decade writing about how big companies treat the people they think nobody's watching. Her stories didn't just go viral. Twice they'd changed federal policy. With Marcus's written consent, Vince sent her the recording. The dominoes were lined up. Somebody just had to tip the first one. Bradford Kane was about to have the worst morning of his professional life, and he had no idea yet. Kane was the CEO of Crestmont Aviation Group. 20 years he'd spent building the company's reputation on 2 words, luxury and discretion. His clients flew with Crestmont because nothing ever leaked, nothing ever went wrong, and nobody ever made a scene. He was at his desk in Dallas when Vince's letter hit his inbox, the recording attached. He opened it half distracted, pressed play, and 12 minutes later he was sitting motionless, both palms flat on the desk, his coffee gone cold and forgotten. He'd watched Brooke Sterling slap his single largest client across the face. He'd heard her mutter about people who don't belong. He'd heard her pick up the intercom and lie to ground ops in a fake, trembling voice. Every undeniable second of it. He picked up the phone and called Marcus directly. Marcus didn't answer. Vince did. "Mr. Kane." Polite, unhurried, devastating. "Mr. Bishop won't be taking calls from Crestmont until we have a written response. You have until the day after tomorrow." The letter was specific. The line went dead. Bradford Kane set the phone down, leaned back in his chair, and for the first time in 20 years as a CEO, he genuinely did not know what to do. He found out fast that it was worse than one bad attendant on one bad morning. When Crestmont's HR pulled Brooke Sterling's real file, not the clean summary that gets passed around, the actual unredacted thing, the legal team went silent. 2 prior complaints, both from passengers of color. The first, filed 3 years back by a black executive who said Brooke had asked to see his ID 4 separate times on a 2-hour flight and never once asked anyone else. When he asked her why, she told him she just wanted to be sure he was supposed to be up front. Closed. No action. The second, filed a year and a half later by a Latina couple celebrating an anniversary, who said Brooke had told them their seats were probably a booking error and tried to move them to the back, then been short and cold the rest of the flight. Closed. No action. Both complaints had been investigated and dismissed by the same man, Roy Tillman, complaints supervisor. He'd signed off on each with the same canned note at the bottom. Insufficient evidence. No action warranted. Roy Tillman was placed on administrative leave the same afternoon Brooke was fired. He never came back to his desk, because by noon the day after the demand letter, Brooke Sterling was done. Not suspended, not reassigned, terminated, effective immediately. 9 years of seniority gone in the length of one phone call. She didn't take it quietly. She had a lawyer by that afternoon and a wrongful termination claim by the end of the week. Her argument? That Marcus Bishop had provoked her, that his refusal to comply made her feel unsafe, that the slap was self-defense. Nobody bought a word of it, yet the recording existed, and the recording didn't lie. Now Bradford Kane had the bigger problem, and he knew it. Marcus Bishop, through Vince, had already rejected Crestmont's first settlement offer before the ink dried. And Kane had thrown everything he could think of at it. A formal written apology from the company, lifetime complimentary charter service, a $600,000 payment for emotional distress and reputational harm, with a handwritten note from Kane himself. Vince's response was 2 sentences. Mr. Bishop has no interest in Crestmont's money. His dignity was never for sale, and it isn't now. Instead, Marcus had demands. 3 of them. 1. A public acknowledgement from Crestmont that failures in its complaint process had let a pattern of discrimination continue, unchecked, for years. 2. A full audit of Crestmont's HR and complaint handling procedures run by an outside civil rights organization with no financial ties to the company, not Crestmont's lawyers, not Crestmont's friendly consultants, an independent team that owed them nothing. 3. Mandatory anti-bias training for every single Crestmont employee, from the newest ramp worker to Kane himself, designed and delivered by that outside organization and paid for entirely by Crestmont. Kane agreed to all 3 inside 48 hours. He didn't negotiate a single point. He couldn't afford to, because the 4th blow was already in the air. Despite the apology, despite the audit, despite every concession Kane made, Marcus followed through on the warning in his letter. Lumen Grid Holdings formally terminated its fleet management contract with Crestmont Aviation Group, $11 million a year. Gone. Vince's termination letter was a single page. The last line read, "Lumen Grid Holdings does not maintain business relationships with companies that tolerate the mistreatment of people based on the color of their skin." Marcus moved his entire flight operation to a competing charter firm, one with a documented, verified record on exactly the things Crestmont had failed at. The transition took 6 days. When the news moved through the industry, the reaction was instant. Crestmont's reputation, that 20-year fortress of discretion, took a public hit it had never seen coming. Trade publications ran it. 2 other large clients quietly started asking questions about their own contracts, and Brooke Sterling, sitting alone in her apartment refreshing her phone every 30 seconds, watched the company she'd worked at for 9 years start to crack at the foundation. Because of her, because of one assumption, one slap, one lie, and she still had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Camille Ortiz published her story on a Tuesday at 6 in the morning, Eastern Time. The headline landed like a dropped weight. "He owns the jet. The attendant slapped him anyway." Inside the Crestmont aviation scandal. The piece was airtight. Camille had spent 5 days verifying every fact. The recording, the flight manifest Brooke skipped, the security logs, the 2 buried complaints. She'd interviewed Maya Calderon on the record. She'd obtained Crestmont's internal HR documents through a source inside the company. She'd reached out to Brooke Sterling for comment, and Brooke had declined. The story included key pieces of the recording, with Marcus's full written consent. Not the whole thing, just enough. Brooke's voice telling him people like him don't belong up front. The thud of his bag hitting the floor. The crack of the slap. And then, after, the silence. That long, awful silence, where you can hear him breathing and choosing, very deliberately, not to lose control. That silence was the part people couldn't stop talking about. Within 12 hours, the clips in the article had been viewed 4 million times. Within a day, 9 million. By the end of the second day, it had cleared 15 million, and it was still climbing. It didn't trend. It detonated. Every major outlet picked it up. Cable segments, morning shows, people online dissecting the clip frame by frame. And the reaction was loud, and it was almost entirely one direction, because the recording left no room to argue. There was no other side. There was a woman saying ugly things to a man over the color of his skin, and then slapping him when he wouldn't shrink for her, and then lying about it into a phone. The comment sections all said versions of the same three things. She assaulted him on his own plane. 2 prior complaints and nobody did a thing. This is what happens when it goes unchecked for years. But the internet wasn't where the real consequences were building. 3 weeks after Camille's story ran, the county district attorney filed formal criminal charges against Brooke Sterling. 2 counts. Count 1. Misdemeanor battery, based on the recorded slap, corroborated by Maya Calderon's sworn statement and Officer Delgado's incident report. Count 2. Filing a false report based on the recorded intercom call where she told ground ops that Marcus had grabbed her and become physical, every word of it flatly contradicted by the video and by every witness on board. Brooke's lawyer pushed hard for a plea, reduced charges, no jail, community service, the works. But the DA was holding a case built on crystal-clear video with the whole country watching and offered nothing. It went to trial. It lasted 3 days. It could have lasted 3 hours. The prosecution played the full recording for the jury. Unedited. 11 minutes and 40 seconds, projected on a screen in a silent courtroom. The cabin. The voices. The slap. The lie. All of it. Maya Calderon took the stand. She was nervous, her hands gripping the edge of the witness box, but her testimony was steady and clear, and she never once wavered. She told it in the exact order it happened. Captain Ray Mercer submitted a written statement confirming that Brooke had never been briefed on the client because she'd failed to review the manifest, a direct violation of Crestmont's standard procedure, a step she chose to skip. Then Brooke took the stand. Her lawyer had coached her. Stay calm. Stay sympathetic. Show remorse. It lasted about 4 minutes. Under cross-examination, the prosecutor asked her one question that took the whole thing apart. Ms. Sterling, can you explain to this jury why you assumed Mr. Bishop did not belong in the owner's cabin of an aircraft he owns? Brooke opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. He wasn't dressed like someone who would... She stopped. The courtroom was silent. 12 jurors looking at her. The judge looking at her. The gallery, packed with reporters, looking at her. She never finished the sentence. She didn't need to. Everyone in that room finished it for her. He didn't look like he belonged. And underneath that, the real reason. The one she still couldn't say out loud. The jury was out for under 2 hours. Guilty. Both counts. The judge handed down the sentence. 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service to be served at a civil rights education center, a $10,000 fine, and a criminal record that would show up on every background check she'd ever sit through for the rest of her working life. Brooke stood for the verdict. She didn't cry. She didn't react at all. She just stood there, stiff and hollow, staring straight ahead like a woman watching the last door in a long hallway swing closed. The fallout for the company was nearly as brutal. Crestmont's independent audit finished about 2 months after the incident, and the findings were made public, and they were damning. A documented pattern of complaints from Black and Latino clients quietly closed. Inadequate training, no real accountability anywhere in the chain. A culture of silence held up by middle managers like Roy Tillman, who treated discrimination reports as paperwork to file and forget. 3 more Crestmont employees were terminated based on what the audit turned up. Roy Tillman was fired for cause, his severance pulled. and Bradford Kane, facing a restless board and clients drifting toward the exits, stepped down as CEO 14 months after the slap. His resignation letter cited personal reasons. Nobody believed it. But here's the part of the story that I think actually matters more than any verdict. Marcus Bishop, the man who'd spent his whole life keeping his head down, stepped into the light. On his own terms. Quietly. The way he did everything. He started a fund. He named it after his grandmother, the Cora Bishop Initiative. $15 million set up to provide free legal representation to people who get discriminated against in service industries, airlines, hotels, restaurants, stores. People who don't have a recording. People who don't own the plane. People whose complaints would otherwise land on some Roy Tillman's desk and get stamped "no action warranted" and disappear. In its first year, the fund took on 110 cases. Most settled. A handful went to trial. They won every one of those. Brooke Sterling ended one man's mourning with a slap. Marcus Bishop made sure a whole lot of other people would never have to swallow that same silence alone. So, where is everybody now? Marcus closed the Charlotte deal the same afternoon Brooke was deplaned. All $420 million of it, no complications. Lumen Grid expanded into 5 new states the following year and crossed $7 billion in value. But Marcus didn't change. Not really. He still flies private. He still wears the denim jacket and the work boots. He still walks into terminals alone with no entourage. And yes, he still records his interactions when something feels off, because he learned a long time ago that in a lot of rooms, proof isn't a luxury. It's the only thing standing between you and somebody else's version of events. He gave exactly one interview after the trial. Camille Ortiz asked him what he wanted people to take from it. He thought about it for a while, and then he said, "I want people to remember that this almost stayed quiet. If I hadn't started recording when she walked up that aisle, it would have been her word against mine. And both of us know how that usually ends." Brooke Sterling served out her 18 months of probation and her 200 hours. She did every bit of what the court ordered, but the sentence wasn't the part that followed her around. She applied to 3 other charter companies after Crestmont. All 3 passed. She applied to 2 hotel chains. Same answer. Her name had turned into a thing HR departments whispered about, a case study they put up in compliance training, a cautionary tale about what happens when bias goes unchecked for years and the bill finally comes due. A reporter tracked her down about 10 months after the trial. She'd moved to a small town a few states away and was working a register at a retail store. She declined to comment. The reporter described her as quiet and diminished, a woman living in the long shadow of one single morning. Maya Calderon never went back to Crestmont. She didn't have to. The charter company that took over Marcus's fleet offered her a lead attendant position, a title that would have taken her 5 more years to earn the old way. She took it that same day. An aviation trade magazine asked her later why she spoke up that morning when she knew exactly what it could cost her. She said, "Because I saw it, and staying quiet would have made me part of it. I couldn't carry that." Then she added something that stuck with me. Silence isn't neutral. Silence is a choice. And that morning I decided I wasn't going to make it anymore. Crestmont Aviation survived. Barely, and never the same. They lost 2 more major clients in the months after the scandal broke, and the reputation Bradford Kane had spent 2 decades building was permanently scarred. Not by the slap itself, by the years of buried complaints that made the slap inevitable. And the Cora Bishop Initiative kept growing. By the end of its 2nd year, it had funded legal help in more than 200 cases across a dozen states, and it had partnered with 3 universities to build bias awareness training for the hospitality and aviation industries. Marcus read every quarterly report himself. He never held a press conference about it. He just kept building. Quiet, steady, the way he'd always done it. All right. Look, the story itself, the names, the flight, all of it, that part's made up. I'll be honest with you about that. But that feeling? That part's not made up at all. Walking into a room and watching somebody decide who you are before you've said a single word. Getting treated like you did something wrong just for existing in a space they didn't expect to find you in. That happens. It happens a lot more than it should, and most of the time there's no camera rolling, no Officer Delgado, no recording to set the record straight. Most of the time it just happens, and the person it happened to goes home and carries it alone. And that's the part that stays with me, every time. So, if any piece of this hits something real for you, do me a favor. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Let me know if you'd have spoken up the way Maya did, or if you'd have stayed quiet in that galley. Be honest, it's harder than it sounds. And if you want more stories like this one, you know what to do. I've got another one ready for you right now.